I'm delighted to introduce Doug Katz, who is a relatively recent member of the Daughton Family Center. And it's been just wonderful to have him. He has deep expertise in evidence-based psychotherapy and mindfulness-based psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. And these are the types of therapies where there is rather good evidence that it really can be helpful. It's not just sympathetic listening and undifferentiated chat. Instead, it's an intervention that really has an effect. So, Dr. Katz?
Good morning. So, as I thought about this talk, it seemed to me that the best way to approach this would be to, Andy and I were talking earlier, and probably in the Boston metro area there are half a dozen psychotherapists who specialize in treating bipolar disorder. So it wouldn't actually be very useful to me to for me to simply say, here are the best treatments for bipolar disorder, go find somebody who can do one of these treatments. So what I decided to do instead is take some time to help to give you some tools that, that you as people who've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder or family members of people who've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder can actually take some control over your illness or your child's illness, and actually use the tools that you acquire to inform the therapy that you then go and seek in the community. So why do we do psychosocial interventions for bipolar disorder? Really, there's two main categories of reasons. One is to prevent recurrences of major mood episodes. And by major mood episodes, I mean when we have symptoms of depression that cluster together and last for a period of time and have a certain type of intensity and have impairment in functioning. We also use psychosocial interventions to reduce symptom burden and improve functioning and quality of life between mood episodes. As Dr. Wozniak mentioned, with bipolar disorder, it doesn't seem to occur that you're either in a depressive state or you're in a manic state, and when those states end, you are symptom-free. That is rarely what occurs, and so we use psychosocial interventions for what we call residual symptoms. Let me say, psychosocial interventions are adjunctive treatments for bipolar disorder. They are not a replacement for medication. Bipolar disorder involves dysregulation of regulatory functions in the brain. It involves dysregulation of brain circuits and the production and transmission of neurotransmitters, and the medications are designed to help and correct these dysregulations. And this is not something that a psychosocial approach can do on its own. I just want to be very clear about that. So I'm going to start with psychoeducation, a psychoeducational approach for bipolar disorder. And I'm starting here because for the newly diagnosed, this is absolutely critical. This approach can occur in individual therapy, in group therapy, in couples therapy. And there are four main areas that we target. The first is illness awareness. And this one might sound simple, but it often takes a fair amount of time because there's almost always difficulty with a full acceptance of the diagnosis. Being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, you're told that you now have a chronic illness which requires taking medications every day for probably a very long period of time. It requires adjustments in lifestyle, in your activities, in your habits. It may require adjustments in some of your goals and your time horizon for meeting those goals. So often, the initial period after diagnosis is a rocky period where there is poor compliance with medications, and there is a conflict in the family because everybody in the family, now we finally have this diagnosis, now we finally have a roadmap, maybe we can have some improvement, and yet the person who has been diagnosed is the one person who does not seem to be getting with the program. So advice to parents, I see a lot of nodding heads out there. Advice to caregivers and parents in this early stage. Patience. Lots and lots of patience. And alongside that patience, firmness, clarity. You can be patient and kind and understanding and still be completely and totally honest with your children about the nature of the disorder that they've been diagnosed with, about what it requires in order to remain stable. The other thing I would say is that if, as a caregiver, you are having some dysregulation of your own as a result of trying to help your child, get some help for yourself. And I say this just because you'll be happier that way. But another thing that we have clearly found is that in families where there's a high level of conflict, that the course of bipolar disorder tends to be much rockier and much worse. So it's very important that we find productive ways of managing conflict and solving conflict. Another area targeted by psychoeducation is adherence to treatment. Just the importance of taking medications as prescribed and engaging in health-promoting behaviors. A third area is how important it is to learn to detect what we call prodromal symptoms of a mood episode or early warning signs. We've found that if we can detect an early signs of a depressive episode, you know, a bit less interest in things, a bit more difficulty getting up in the morning, those kinds of things, or in mania, a slight uptick in irritability. If we can notice those things and do two things, get in touch with the psychiatrist to see if a temporary adjustment is required in order to maintain stability, and also if there are any behaviors and lifestyle habits that need to be altered in order to maintain stability. And the last area is as I said, the importance of lifestyle regularity, improving the predictability and regularity of especially sleep, but things like meals, social activities, work, exercise, all of those things are very important in maintaining stability. So I'm going to go over not just the psychoeducational approach, but a few other psychotherapy approaches, and I'm going to give you maybe one or two examples of the techniques used in each of these, just to give you sort of a sampling so that you can see which ones sound like they might be appealing to you as the patient or the family. So, mood charting. I cannot possibly overstate the importance of mood charting. So I think you can see this here. Mood charting involves a daily account of is there any elevation in mood? You see the highs there, the lows there, hours slept. Anxiety and irritability anxiety is often a comorbid problem with bipolar disorder, and when anxiety goes up, mood symptoms are more likely to rise as well. And irritability is a consistent feature of mania and also depression quite often as well. Tracking medication, which medications you're taking, the dose, and when you take them, as well as the presence of alcohol and drugs. So a lot of people at the beginning resist mood charting. Why? Well, it's a little dull, I'll admit that. But often people will say, well, this just kind of reminds me of this diagnosis. I want to take my medications, right? The medications are working for me, and I just want to go live my life. But mood charting is incredibly important. Why do we do it? Well, the first obvious reason is if we notice a change in mood, that is a sign to you that you may need to contact your doctor, your psychiatrist, and schedule a meeting that's before your next scheduled meeting to talk about an adjustment in medication. Oftentimes with psychiatrists, you might see your psychiatrist regularly for a while, and then you get stabilized on medications, and then the appointments are much more spaced out. Mood charting is one of the only ways of really consistently tracking what your mood fluctuations are like between appointments and making sure that we prevent relapse of major recurrences. So let's see. In addition to mood charting, we also want to have people charting what we call social rhythms or social metrics. These are things like when do you get out of bed in the morning? When is your first contact with another person? When do you have your meals? When does your workday start? When do you have lunch? All of these things in sort of minute detail. Other activities, and these, by the way, are customizable. These mood charts can be found online fairly easily. We also want to be charting stressors, right? So if we notice that irritability tends to increase on days when, let's say, you're working a particular shift at your job with a particular person, that is very important information. It may require that we try to make an adjustment with our boss, or it may simply require that we take other steps to take care of ourselves in order to reduce the probability of mood worsening. The information that we're going to track about sleep is incredibly important. Bipolar disorder seems to be especially sensitive to minor deviations even in sleep and wake cycles, to circadian rhythms. And all of these things that we track, all of these activities, are the things that help determine the circadian rhythm, that sleep-wake cycle. So if via mood charting we realize that on Tuesday and Wednesday nights, a person seems to have a lot of trouble sleeping, and they don't go to bed until 1 in the morning or something like that, we're going to want to look at all of the activities that precede those, what's happening on Monday during the day and Tuesday during the day that seem to set the stage for this. So often, just by doing mood charting, we can really reduce recurrences. So the research has shown that a psychoeducational approach increases time to a recurrence of a mood episode, fewer recurrences over time, reduced hospital admissions, reduced mania, reduced depressive symptoms, and increased medication adherence. And I will say that mood charting and social metric charting is something that ought to be continued even if you engage in one of the types of psychotherapy that I'm now going to discuss, because the focus of your treatment will be informed largely by the data that you derive from mood charting. Okay, so far we've only talked about moods and behaviors. Having bipolar disorder is a very meta kind of experience, because you are going to constantly be asked to think about your thinking. So we here have a classic line from the Bard: there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So CBT, Most people have probably heard of CBT. It's based on the idea that events that occur in our lives do not in and of themselves produce fluctuations in our mood and our behavior, but it's that our interpretation of those events leads to changes in mood. So this is the basic cognitive model of mood disorders. We have a situation, I get criticized at work. We have an automatic thought that goes through our head, I'm not good enough. That may even kind of cycle and mushroom into I'm going to be fired, I'm not going, this will be my third job this year, how am I going to ever find, and just because your boss said one critical remark at work. What that tends to do, those thoughts will then lead to negative feelings, worthlessness, anxiety, will lead to behaviors such as, in a moment like this where we're having these kind of distorted thoughts, what we really need is a trusted person to sit with us and talk to us and help us regain our perspective, but the thoughts and the emotions tend to lead us to behaviors that are opposed to that, like avoiding contact with other people. There are also physiological reactions that occur, fatigue, loss of appetite, and these things tend to create a vicious circle. So, cognitive distortions. This is another thing that you'll be asked to spend a lot of time thinking about. Cognitive distortions are kind of habitual and repetitive ways of thinking about events that get us into trouble in terms of mood. The first is all or nothing thinking, or black and white thinking, which is thinking that manifests as an inability or an unwillingness to see the shades of gray. In other words, something is either fantastic or awful. You are either a success or a complete and utter failure. Mind reading is another common one, which manifests as the inaccurate belief that we know exactly what another person is thinking. For example, you see a stranger with an unpleasant look on their face, and you jump to the conclusion that they're thinking something negative about you. We see this one all the time in families, right? So somebody walks into a room and they notice that mom or dad has a certain look on their face, and they jump to the conclusion that mom or dad is angry with them and is blaming them for the car breaking down or having been late for dinner last night, and those thought distortions then lead to irritability. The irritability can then lead to behaviors like lashing out. Then mom or dad gets dysregulated, and we have worsening of symptoms. Emotional reasoning is another very common one in bipolar disorder, which is when we take our emotions as facts. Something is true because we feel it to be true. I see this one a lot with emergent mania, where somebody has a lot of energy and they decide that, and they, by the way, they've been depressed for months beforehand and have not been able to achieve their goals. Finally, they're feeling good and they want to do everything in a short period of time. I've got this podcast network that I really have always wanted to develop. Now is the time, all right? But I got to get funding for it, right? And if I'm going to get funding for it, I'm going to have to lay out maybe $5,000 or $10,000 and have a party and invite investors and all these things. And forget about whether this is all reasonable or not. I feel like this is going to work, right? A very, very common cognitive distortion. So the kind of bedrock technique in cognitive behavioral therapy is cognitive restructuring, which is you look at the situation that you're in all the way on the left. I yelled at my 3-year-old and woke up the baby who then wouldn't stop crying. I'm 90% intensity, angry at myself, angry at my kids, angry at my husband. I'm also very sad, guilty, and ashamed. What are those automatic negative thoughts? Well, I must be a terrible person to not be happy all the time to have these 3 lovely children. And I'm 90% certain that that's true. Then we take a scientific approach. We say, what is the evidence for this thought? What is the evidence for the thought that you're a very bad person? Well, any decent mother would love her kids. Any good person would feel happy about having a beautiful new baby. Okay, so what is the evidence that does not support this thought? Well, I guess I've always cared for my friends and family. I usually try to do good things for others. I volunteer. People that know me have never said that I was a bad person. Those things all seem to cut against this idea that I must be a terrible person to have yelled at my 3-year-old. Then we help people create a more balanced alternative thought. I'm an okay person who is overwhelmed and having a bad reaction to motherhood right now. And then we re-rate the emotions. 30% angry, 10% sad, 10% guilty or ashamed. This is a simple but very effective tool for helping people reframe their thinking. However, changes in cognition are not often, 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Changes in cognition are not often enough on their own, so we need to help people do behavioral experiments. So what's an example of a behavioral experiment? So oftentimes when people are depressed, they believe that it's impossible for them to socialize. They know it's good for them, but they just can't seem to get out of bed. They can't do it. Well, we might actually have them test that hypothesis, right, with some kind of behavioral experiment. This helps to facilitate actually learning by doing. People kind of, when they learn by doing, they kind of know things more at a gut level than just at a cognitive level when they might do cognitive restructuring. Another common aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy is behavioral activation. So we know that there's a vicious cycle in depression especially of inactivity and worsening of depressive moods. So sometimes simply getting people, even though it's very effortful, to engage in behaviors that are meaningful to them. It will be hard at first. They won't experience pleasure at first. But if these are activities that are personally meaningful to them, they will eventually begin to sort of bump into the pleasurable aspects of these experiences that they once enjoyed. And they'll begin to feel a little bit better. CBT has shown to be quite effective for symptoms of bipolar disorder. Fewer mood relapses, fewer episodes of depressed mood, mania, and improved quality of life. Moving on. Dialectical behavior therapy was designed to help people who have very, very strong, overpowering, intense emotions involving impulse, self-harm, suicidal ideation, in response often to overwhelming feelings of rejection and emotional pain. Modalities include individual and group therapy, phone coaching, and therapist consultation. There are 4 treatment modules in DBT. One is mindfulness, which is being aware of the present moment without judging the present moment. Emotion regulation, which is understanding emotions and reducing vulnerability to strong emotions. Distress tolerance, which is getting through crisis situations without making things worse. And interpersonal effectiveness, which is getting your individual needs met in relationships without causing harm to the relationships, much more difficult than it sounds. Mindfulness is a foundational skill in DBT because it helps individuals accept and tolerate powerful emotions instead of relying on habitual and destructive behaviors to manage painful feelings. Within DBT, mindfulness is defined as the capacity to pay attention non-judgmentally to the present moment. This is accomplished by training oneself to be aware of and directly experience life through the 5 senses. So what's an example of a mindfulness strategy in DBT? Urge surfing. Okay? So often bipolar disorder involves very, very strong urges. I've just been accused by my parents of not making it to dinner last night. I know that the car broke down. They don't think that the car really broke down. They think just I was off with my boyfriend. I've made it up to my room without screaming at anybody, but I don't know how much longer I can handle this. I want to go downstairs and tell them all what I think of them. Well, I'm going to try to understand this urge and work my way through it. So it's kind of a meditative approach where you focus on the area in your body where the urge is being felt. You acknowledge and name that craving. I'm having an urge to go downstairs and scream at people. You move around the body to see what other areas the urge might be expressed. And with each out breath, you try to release some of the tension in that area of the body. Another module is distress tolerance, which is for what we call emotional emergencies, right? And so this is when you have an overwhelmingly strong surge of emotion that feels like it's about to spin out of control very quickly. So in that other example, right, of being blamed for not showing up to dinner, maybe going right to the urge surfing is impossible, right, because you're not calm enough. So we will want to employ one of these distress tolerance strategies. My favorite one is called the dive response, which is you literally do this. You take a bucket and you fill it with freezing cold ice water, and you plunge your entire face into the bucket of ice water. Lots of fun. But after about 15 to 30 seconds, the freezing cold water tells your brain that you're diving underwater. Your heart slows down, blood flow to non-essential organs is reduced, and it can actually help you regulate your emotions. So I might plan with a patient who has chronic conflict at home. Okay, the next time you're blamed for something and you think it's not your fault, you're going to use distress tolerance, you're going to use the dive response, then you're going to use urge surfing, and then you'll move on and you'll use your interpersonal effectiveness skills, which are very helpful for resolving conflicts, advocating for one's own needs, while balancing the needs of others and building a sense of mastery and respect, self-respect. DEARMAN, this is an acronym for a strategy for trying to get another person to change what they're doing, to do more of what they're doing, to do more of something or to do less of something. So the first thing we do is we describe what happened. When I came in last night, you immediately told me that I was at fault for being late to dinner. Express, I felt very upset when you did that because I knew that it wasn't my fault. Assert, in the future, I would like you to ask me questions and for us to have a discussion before you conclude who was at fault. Reinforce means you give the person that you're trying to change some positive feedback. If you were able to have a more reasonable, rational approach with me, I would appreciate it so much, and I think we'd all get along much better. Mindful is the approach that we want to have when we're trying to get other people to change their behavior, and what that means is when the conversation starts to divert, we continually bring it back to the matter at hand. We try to appear confident even when we're not, so that the other person has respect for us and takes us seriously, and we also are prepared to negotiate. Quickly, emotion regulation skills are to learn people how to understand and name their emotions and change their unwanted emotions. Opposite to emotion action, this is the last one I will do. Emotions, each emotion carries with it a characteristic urge, an action urge. So sadness, the action urge associated with sadness is to be alone, to stay in bed. Angry, to yell, attack, be judgmental. So this is a fancy version of fake it until you make it, essentially. Right? So if we are sad and alone in bed, we try to get ourselves up and out and interacting, and then we evaluate how effective that was and how it affected our emotions. DBT, research has shown very effective for reducing depressive symptoms, reducing mania, emotional dysregulation, and suicidal thinking as well. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy basically rests on the assumption that people who have had depressive and manic episodes become distressed in their environment, and they return to habitual modes kind of automatic pilot modes of thinking and behavior. And the goal of mindfulness-based therapy is to interrupt automatic cognitive processes and teach participants to notice when automatic thought processes and behaviors are occurring. So instead of becoming lost in habitual thought processes, we help people to cultivate awareness of their thoughts, feelings, and sensations for what they are, which are temporary internal events and not facts that actually convey personal meaning. What I mean by that is, if you're depressed, an example of approaching your depression mindfully would be, my body feels heavy and I am feeling sadness. The habitual mode might be, I'm such a mess that I can't even get out of bed. And that subtle shift can make a lot of difference. Decentering, again, is a hallmark of mindfulness-based approach, which means that we, instead of thinking of our thoughts and feelings as facts, personal facts that tell a terrible story about us, we see them for what they are, which are impermanent and objective occurrences in the mind. Couple of mindfulness-based techniques are a quick 3-minute meditation called the 3-minute breathing space. Another one is the body scan meditation. These are both techniques that you can find easily online and in instructional books on DBT. The body scan is especially useful for people who are new to meditative approaches. You can do it lying down instead of kind of sitting upright like a lot of meditation approaches. And it's very helpful for training people to shift attention away from their repetitive and upsetting thoughts. And it also helps to release and process tension that is stored and held in the body. Very efficacious for reducing depressive symptoms, anxiety, and improving emotion regulation. Real quickly, there are 2 others that I won't really talk in detail about. Family-focused therapy. This focuses on the idea that bipolar disorder impacts relationships, relationships impact bipolar disorder, and special attention is paid to helping families learn to communicate better. And interpersonal and social rhythm therapy, which facilitates an understanding of how, again, how relationships and work and school affect bipolar, how bipolar affects those things, and also to emphasize, like I mentioned earlier, those sleep and wake rhythms and patterns of daily activity. Conclusions. These psychosocial interventions have shown a lot of efficacy for bipolar disorder. They are not a replacement for medication. And what I want to leave you with is the reason I spent so much time at the beginning talking about the mood charting is because, like I said, it can be difficult to find a therapist who specializes in bipolar disorder, but there's so much that can be done on your own. And what people can do is they can become experts at managing their moods to the best of their abilities using mood tracking consultation with their psychiatrist. And then people can go find trained therapists out in the community who do have expertise in CBT and DBT and MBCT, and they can bring their own particular knowledge of their bipolar disorder and collaborate with a therapist to very good effect. Thank you. Question? Yes, sir.
Has resiliency training in personal agency or self-efficacy, and for individuals that have bipolar disorder and may have PTSD, let's say due to trauma, induced war, an accident, car accident, has somatic therapy, either of those been shown to be useful for individuals with bipolar disorder?
I don't know that there. Can you repeat the question?
So
So the idea was, have somatic therapies been used and training?
Personal agency and self-efficacy, or resiliency, one of those.
So I think in terms of self-efficacy training, the interpersonal effectiveness module in dialectical behavior therapy has been shown to be effective for increasing self-efficacy, mastery, resilience. So many of these treatments do affect things like emotional resilience. They just may not be the primary outcomes that are being looked at. Not so sure about the somatic therapies, but we are looking at more treatments for PTSD in people with bipolar disorder because it's a very common problem.
Oh, hello?
Hi.
Hi. I have heard some discussion about some online tools that may be available for tracking mental health conditions. And I've also heard some discussion about some concern about privacy and use of the information to discriminate. Can you speak to that, the use of online tools for some of your social metric tracking and the like?
I wish I knew. I have personal. Andy, have you heard about social metric information being sort of used to violate privacy? I have not heard about that, but we do have online tools and online interventions at the Mood Network, which I think will be discussed later, and all of that information I know is completely confidential. We have not had any issues with that at all. But actually, I'd like to hear more about that maybe later from you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, over here.
Very quick. The first question, very rudimentary question is, I don't need that. Can we get like hard copies of those wonderful, charts, the mood charting? Get them?
Yes, sure. Oh, sorry. The question was, can we get some hard copies of the mood charting? And yes, if you approach me, we can get those to you for sure.
And the other thing is, my big question is, how do I get someone, beloved, to actually use? How do we get them to not only initiate, but to continue when you're not around them every minute saying?
So mood charting is best done at the same time every day, usually at night, before bed, but before you're too tired. So I actually encourage everyone, whether you have bipolar disorder or not, to do this kind of charting. It can be incredibly helpful in learning about your own patterns of energy and mood fluctuation, what works for you, what doesn't. So for as long as it takes, call your child at 9 o'clock every night and do your mood charting together. Yes.
Hi, thank you for sharing all those resources. I'm thinking here, because I have a family member who I care for, that having visits to the therapist in a weekly basis and always asking for resources and strategies and tools. And I realized that not many of the therapists out there have enough knowledge of where the resources are, what tools to use, and we're just looking into the more like practical stuff instead of technology or more tools that would provide a way to measure outcomes. And I really feel that we have to think of how we bring more education to the therapists that are working with the kid, and also how do we find a way to bring this information to the parents or the people who are care for this. Because even if you look into this type of information on the internet, sometimes you don't know the language, the right language. So there's something missing, because I had, is one of my kids, I had the opportunity throughout the year to meet with different therapists, and I felt that it's always stuck in something that I keep asking where the resources are, what resources they don't know. So I wonder is there's something that needs to be done really to get to this point where parents have some tools to be able to use. And sometimes it's difficult, but it could become a practice, and practicing over time it becomes part of the treatment, not only the medication on sitting, listening, and sometimes you don't really get to the solutions.
Sure. I guess I would say a couple things about that. First, anybody who doesn't already have David Miklowitz's Bipolar Disorder Survival Guide, the book is out at our resource table out there, but it is a sort of encyclopedia of bipolar disorder, which is incredibly useful because it was designed to provide people with the, part of my talk was based on that book. He gives people the tools to really take control of bipolar disorder, whether or not you are able to find somebody who specializes in it and can point you to all the best resources. I know what you mean by finding things online and not knowing, maybe it provides a cursory explanation of what to do, but then you don't know where to go from there. Is it actually true and evidence-based? And what I would say is we are compiling on the Mood Network, which is an online community. Let's see, how do we access Mood Network? You can go to the website and you can sign up for it. It's a community of people with mood disorders and those helping them, and there are online interventions there. There's lots and lots of empirically validated information there that you can trust. The Mood Network, moodnetwork.org. The Bipolar Disorder Survival Guide. Yeah. Yes, sir, in the back.
iHome.org is not working.
Sorry, which website?
mghome.org.
Oh, I think that's the Psychiatry Academy, the Mass General Psychiatry website.
And the other question is, what's the difference between DBT and CBT?
So CBT focuses more specifically on patterns of thought and changing sort of maladaptive patterns of thinking and the behaviors that come out of those thoughts. And DBT is a more kind of holistic treatment that covers things like impulsive behaviors, really out of control emotions. It teaches mindfulness. It's a more kind of holistic approach.
And what's the difference? What's the acronym for CBT and DBT?
The acronym, so CBT is for cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT is dialectical behavior therapy.
Dialectical, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, one more, yes.
You mentioned about trauma and bipolar and how we need to do more. Is there some people that do specific trauma work, and is that important to do separate from therapy in terms of trauma?
Yeah, sorry. The question was about doing trauma work for a person who has bipolar disorder, but also may have early childhood trauma or symptoms of PTSD. We're actually doing an intervention study at the Doughton Center right now for people with PTSD and bipolar disorder. We're using prolonged exposure, which is the kind of gold standard PTSD treatment that we use on our military veterans. And it's very effective, and we're about a year into that project right now, and it's going really well. So if people, I guess that's the last thing that I would say is that, at the Doughton Center, we're only so many people, and we can only take on so many patients. We're sort of busting at the gills, and so what we've decided is that the best way that we can help is to do research to figure out what works and to disseminate that knowledge. So if you're interested in the trauma study, if you're interested in participating or having family members perhaps participate in one of our medication studies, please, we would love to partner with you because it's really the way that we feel like we can make the biggest and widest impact. Okay, yes, one more quick one.
My question relates back to Dr. Wozniak too because I'm thinking about early intervention. And I know from my own experience, I don't think I
Okay.
that hindsight is 20/20, looking back to see that there was evidence of things, and the part that the educational system and first dimension. Hesitation to, Dr. Wozniak said, say, this person is all the information, and they're treating them as if they are, which is a great thing. But I don't understand where the disconnect is. And so basically the question is, what is being done for teachers, the people that spend time with children? They're the ones that are going to see and let people know. I know they're overwhelmed.
I think the answer is not enough. I think the question was what's being done in terms of early detection and early intervention for bipolar disorder. I think teachers are more educated about things like depression and anxiety than they once were, and I think screenings are done in some schools, but we have a long way to go with bipolar disorder for sure. So I think I'm out of time. Thank you.